Okay. So today's class, dear students, will be commencing with the flower and the inflorescence. So I've already told you, flower is a modified vegetative shoot meant for the purpose of sexual reproduction. Flower is a modified vegetative shoot meant for the purpose of sexual reproduction. So I told you why it is a modified shoot. In case of rose, they have seen that even from in between the rows, the stem has continued, indicating that probably the flower was earlier a vegetative shoot. They were all modified leaves, the sepal, petal. So during the process of evolution, they became the flowers. So that is the reason the definition is flower is a modified vegetative shoot meant for the purpose of sexual reproduction. So they have the reproductive organs in them in andrecium, which is the male reproductive organ, and gynoecium, which is the female reproductive organ. So we'll be discussing about that in detail in this present session. So let us proceed with the next slide. So flower is a modified shoot wherein the shoot apical meristem changes to floral meristem. I've already defined what is a flower. Flower is a modified vegetative shoot meant for the purpose of sexual reproduction. But when you look at the developmental stages of these flower, so it is a modified shoot wherein the shoot apical meristem has changed to floral meristem. You can see the slide here. So there is a leaf primordium, floral meristem, inflorescence meristem. So the shoot meristem has modified, shoot apical meristem has changed itself to form the floral meristems. And here the internodes do not elongate and the axis gets condensed in case of floral meristem. In floral meristem, the internode, they are not going to elongate and they are going to be condensed and the axis gets condensed. So the apex, that is the tip of this, they produce various floral appendages laterally at successive nodes instead of leaves. The apex is the tip of this, they produce various floral appendages laterally at the successive nodes instead of leaves. What are the various floral appendages that can arise? Sepals, petals, andrecium, gynoecium. They're all the various floral appendages that arise instead of leaves. In a stem meristem, it would have been a leaf, but here you notice there are floral appendages that they are arising instead of leaves. Those are calyx, corolla, andrecium, and gynoecium. That is sepal, petal, stamen, and the pistil. So when a shoot tip transforms into a flower, it is a solitary flower. That is only one flower you have. But if shoot tip is transformed into an inflorescence meristem, you can notice that there would be collection of flowers. Okay, so in this particular diagram of the developmental stages of floral meristem, so the shoot apex is having inflorescence meristem. So they develop a lot of flowers. If this shoot apex had a floral meristem, so they develop into only one flower, and we call that as solitary inflorescence. So they end up with only one flower. So the arrangement of cluster of flowers, inflorescence is arrangement of cluster of flowers on the axis. This axis is inflorescence axis, we call it as peduncle. The arrangement of flowers on the inflorescence axis or peduncle, we call it as inflorescence. Inflorescence is an arrangement of cluster of flowers on the inflorescence axis, or you can also call this inflorescence axis as peduncle. It is called as inflorescence. Okay, so you see here different slides of inflorescence. So you can notice here the inflorescence axis is elongated, and here you can notice the racemose inflorescence where the tip of the inflorescence axis can continue. But in cymose inflorescence, the inflorescence axis ends with a flower. So they are definite, whereas in racemose type, the inflorescence axis or peduncle is indefinite. Whereas in cymose, the racemose inflorescence, the cymose inflorescence, you can notice that the inflorescence axis is definite. So based on whether the apex gets converted into a flower or continues to grow, the inflorescence are of two types, namely racemose inflorescence and cymose inflorescence. So you have two types of inflorescence based on whether the inflorescence axis apex they convert into a flower or continue to grow. On that basis, inflorescence is of two types. That is, yeah, the peduncle is indefinite in racemose. In cymose, the peduncle ends up with a flower. It is definite. So, based on whether the apex or the inflorescence apex gets converted into a flower or continues to grow, the inflorescences are of two types, the racemose inflorescence and cymose inflorescence. So in this racemose inflorescence, the main axis, see whenever I'm talking about main axis, I'm talking of inflorescence axis. So it continues to grow. See, in racemose inflorescence, the main axis continues to grow. They don't end up with a flower. And in racemose inflorescence, one more important feature that you can notice is they have acropetal succession of flowers. That is, the older flowers are found at the base of the inflorescence. You can see it in this diagram. The older flowers are found at the base of the inflorescence, and younger flowers or the floral buds you find at the apex of the inflorescence. So we call this type of arrangement as acropetal succession of flower. So in the racemose inflorescence, the inflorescence axis continues to grow. So they are indefinite, and you find that the older flowers are found at the base and the younger flowers are found at the apex. So the older flowers are found at the base and the younger flowers are found at the apex. So we call this type of arrangement of flowers as acropetal succession. In cymose inflorescence, the main axis, that is the inflorescence axis, they terminate with a flower. So you can notice in this diagram, they are terminating with a flower. So the inflorescence axis growth is limited. That is, they are definite. And second aspect that you can notice is there is a basipetal succession of flowers in cymose. That is, you find the younger flowers at the base and older flowers are at the apex. So younger flowers are at the base of the inflorescence. The buds are seen at the base of the inflorescence. The older flowers, they are found at the apex of the inflorescence axis. What is inflorescence axis? We call it as peduncle. Okay. In cymose, you can see the example of jasmine. See the main axis, the inflorescence axis ends up with a flower. And you can also see the basipetal succession of flowers where the uh, younger flowers are seen at the base and older flowers which are blooming, you can see it at the apex of the inflorescence. So you can see at the apex of the inflorescence, the older flowers. At the base of the inflorescence, you are seeing the bud condition. So this type of inflorescence, we call it as cymose inflorescence. Then we had discussed in the flower. I had already told you flower is a modified vegetative shoot meant for the sexual reproduction. The stalk of the flower, see you can see this diagram. The stalk of the flower, we call it as pedicel. The stalk of the leaf, we called it as petiole. But in flower, the flower floral stalk, we call it as pedicel. And this pedicel ends up with a swollen structure, which is called as thalamus or receptacle. So the pedicel ends up with a swollen structure called as thalamus or receptacle. Then there is reduced leaf found at the base of this pedicel. So this small leaf-like structure found at the base of the pedicel, we call it as bracts. If flowers are having bracts, we call these flowers as bracteate. So in this second slide, you can see the bract labeled. So the small leaf-like structures found at the base of the pedicel or the floral stalk, we call it as bract. If bracts are present, the flowers are called as bracteate, and if bracts are absent, we call the flowers as ebracteate. So remember about this definition about bracteate flowers and ebracteate flowers. If flowers are having this bract, we call them as bracteate, and those without bracts, we call them as ebracteate. So, and you can also see in this parts of a flower, the sepal structure above the receptacle or thalamus, you can see the sepal, petal, stamen, and this pistil, which consists of ovary, style, and stigma. Within the ovary, you find this ovules. So these are the parts of a flower that you should remember about. So a typical flower has four whorls. Nalak Suttirate, four kinds of whorl which are arranged on the thalamus. The first whorl, we call it as calyx. See, calyx is a collection of sepals. When the flowers are in a bud condition, the calyx protects the tender parts of the flower. So they are protective in function, the calyx. So when the flowers bloom, when the buds bloom, you find that the sepals spread out. But in the floral bud, the sepals are protective in function. They protect the uh, tender developing parts of the flower. The sepals protect the bud. Okay, a typical flower has four whorls: the calyx and corolla. Calyx is collection of sepals. Corolla is collection of petals. See, calyx and corolla, we call them as non-essential whorls. Why do we call them as non-essential whorls? Because they are not involved in sexual reproduction. Okay, they are not directly involved in sexual reproduction. That is the reason we call them as non-essential whorls, or it is also called as accessory organs. Calyx and corolla are also called as accessory organs. What is calyx? Collection of sepals. What is corolla? Collection of petals. Then the third whorl is andrecium. Andrecium is also called as collection of stamens. It is the male reproductive organ of the plant. So it is the male reproductive part of the flower. So andrecium is the collection of stamens. Gynoecium is also called as pistil. It is the collection of carpels. So gynoecium is the collection of carpels. Now andrecium is the male reproductive part of the flower. Gynoecium is the female reproductive part of the flower. So since andrecium and gynoecium are directly involved in sexual reproduction, we call them as essential whorl or reproductive organs. So the andrecium and gynoecium, since they are directly involved in the sexual reproduction, we call them as essential whorl, or we also call them as reproductive organs. So, and one more thing that you have to remember, the andrecium is made up of stamens. I told you, collection of stamens. What is the stamen made up of? Stamen has a filament and an anther. Here it is a bilobed anther. So the filament, anther, and the filament, the point at which the filament connects the anther, we call it as connective. All these three together, we call them as stamen. So filament, connective, and anther. The point at which the filament connects the anther, we call it as connective. Okay, filament, connective, and anther together, we call them as stamen. Collection of stamens, we call them as andrecium. Similarly, when we are describing gynoecium or pistil, it is made up of ovary, style, and stigma. So ovary has the ovules within it. So the ovules, after fertilization, they form the seeds. Ovary, after fertilization, they form the fruits. Then there is the style, and the style has stigma. Stigma is the point where the tip of the style has stigma, where the pollen grains are deposited and the pollen grains germinate. When we say pollen grains germinate, they produce pollen tube. Okay, so pollination takes place and the pollen grains are deposited on the stigma. So you should remember about the parts of a gynoecium. So gynoecium is a collection of carpels. So gynoecium is also called as pistil. So what are they made up of? They have a ovary, style, and stigma. Within the ovary, you can notice the ovule. Okay, so these are the four types of whorls of a flower. So the calyx and corolla are called as essential and non-essential whorl or accessory whorl, and the andrecium and gynoecium are called as the essential whorl or reproductive organs. Okay, so the next slide, the flower will describe. See, in some flowers like lily, the calyx and corolla are not distinct. So in some flowers like lily, like coconut flowers, like in case of champak flowers, sampige, the calyx and corolla, they are not distinct. Both of them look similar. The calyx and corolla you cannot differentiate, and they look similar. We call those structures as tepals. Instead of calling them as sepals or petals, we call them as tepals. Tepals. So this is noticed in case of lily, in case of coconut flowers, in case of sampige, that is Michaelia champaka. Scientific name is Michaelia champaka. English name is champak flowers. Sampige we call it as champak flowers. So you notice that there is no difference between the calyx and corolla, and you cannot distinguish between calyx and corolla. They are not distinct. So such structures, when you cannot distinguish between calyx and corolla, and they are not distinct, we call them as perianth. What is perianth? Perianth is collection of tepals. See, in case of coconut, tender coconut, elliru, when you are having it, at the base you find this 3 plus 3 structures. Many times you might have used that as a spoon for scraping the ganji from the tender coconut. You might have used that. See, this will be 3 plus 3 arrangement. You cannot, they are persistent tepals. Even after the fruit formation, you find the persistent tepals in case of coconut. So in tender coconut, you might have used that leaf-like structures, as you might have taken it out and used it as spoon-like structure for scraping this meat part of the coconut, that is ganji. So 3 plus 3, they are perianth. Then in case of sampige, the yellow petal-like structures, they are not petal. So you cannot differentiate between sepal and petal there. Both of them look similar. So we call that structure as tepals. ಸಂಪಿಗೆ ಹೂದಲ್ಲಿ ಪೆಟಲ್ಲು ಸೆಪಲ್ ಇರಲ್ಲ. Instead they are having tepals. Tepals is collection of tepals is called as perianth. Okay, even in lily flower, it is going to be perianth. And this season you are eating jackfruit. The entire jackfruit is an inflorescence. What you are eating in jackfruit, the edible part, is perianth. That is the yellow flakes of jackfruit is perianth. Okay, and where is the fruit of jackfruit? See, above the seed within the jackfruit, after you eat this perianth, you notice that there is a simple membranous covering on top of the seed. That simple membranous covering is the fruit. They are the ovary, and the seed is large, that is the ovule. So what we are eating, the edible part in jackfruit is perianth. Okay, so remember about perianth. I gave you some examples of flowers where they have perianth, like lily flower, coconut flower, then champak flower, and even in jackfruit. What we are eating in jackfruit is the perianth, the fleshy part, the fleshy yellow flakes is nothing but perianth in jackfruit. If a flower has both andrecium and gynoecium, it is a bisexual flower. Okay, if a flower is having only andrecium or only gynoecium, we call it as unisexual flowers. In case of pumpkin plant, ಕುಂಬಳಕಾಯಿ ಗಿಡದಲ್ಲಿ or any cucurbitaceae family, ಆಗ್ಲಕಾಯಿ ಅಥವಾ the ಹೀರೆಕಾಯಿ, any of these flowers, creepers, if you look into this cucurbitaceae member, they have male flower and female flower in the same plant. Okay, but they are separate. Generally, in most of the flowers, andrecium, gynoecium are together. We call them as bisexual flowers. The plants also you can call them as bisexual plants. But in cucurbitaceae, male flower is separate, female flower is separate. Similarly, even in coconut inflorescence, male flowers are separate, female flowers are separate. The female flowers after fertilization they form the coconut. Male flowers are very small one. You might see at the base of the coconut tree the small male flowers which have been shed. Okay, so remember about this aspect of it. So a flower having only androecium, we call it as male flower, and they have a name. We call such flowers as staminate flowers. A flower having only gynoecium, we call it as female flowers, and it is also called as pistillate flowers. Female flowers are also called as pistillate flowers. Such a condition where a flower has only male or female part, that is, a flower has only androecium or only gynoecium, we call such condition as unisexual flowers. A flower having either only androecium or only gynoecium, they are termed as unisexual flowers. Then based on symmetry, see in animal kingdom we were using the terms uh, radial symmetry, bilateral symmetry. They are all not applicable in case of flowers. Instead, they have their own terms. We don't use that bilateral symmetry, radial symmetry terms in case of the description of flowers. Rather, some equivalent terms are there. So we use the terms like actinomorphic flowers. Actinomorphic flowers are equivalent to radial symmetry. Zygomorphic flowers, they are equivalent to bilateral symmetry. And asymmetric flowers, they are irregular. So three types of flowers are there based on the symmetry that the flowers exhibit. That is actinomorphic or radial symmetry. So in case of actinomorphic flower, you can see that the radial axis which passes through the center, any radial axis which passes through the center, you find three of them, three of this radial axis passing through the center. Okay, they divide the flower into two equal halves. If such a condition is there, that when any radial axis passing through the center of the flower, if they can divide the flower into two equal halves, we call it as actinomorphic. So there is more than one radial symmetry which is dividing the flower into two equal halves in case of radial symmetry. In case of zygomorphic flowers, so the flower can be dissected into two equal halves in only one plane of symmetry. In only one axis, the flower can be divided into two equal halves. We call such a type of flower as zygomorphic. Example is all these papilionaceous flowers, which have this papilionaceous corolla. Okay, the pulses Cardo variety. They exhibit this papilionaceous corolla. So this flower is in particular Shanka Pushpa. You might have seen this creeper. Okay, so they exhibit this papilionaceous corolla. So you can divide them in only one plane. You can divide this flower into two equal halves. Such a condition we call it as zygomorphic flowers. Then in case of asymmetric flowers, in any plane, you cannot, any plane of division of the flower, you cannot divide them into two equal halves. So we call them as asymmetric flowers. So actinomorphic or radial symmetry. So here a flower can be divided into two equal radial halves in any radial plane passing through the center. See in the first slide, you can see that three radial planes are given which are passing through the center. All these three radial planes, they can divide the flower into two equal halves. In any radial plane of this, they can divide the flower into two equal halves. Such a symmetry, we call it as actinomorphic flowers or radial symmetry. Example for this is mustard, Sasvegida. So where you can notice they have this cruciform corolla. That is, they have plus-like arrangement of corolla. We call it as cruciform corolla. Even in Datura, Datura is a commonly seen weed. So Datura also you notice that they can be divided into two equal halves in any plane of division. So we call it as actinomorphic symmetry. See this Datura has a corolla. If you look the corolla, what is the shape of that corolla there? It is a funnel shaped. So such funnel shaped corolla, we call it as infundibuliform corolla. So just remember this term, cruciform corolla, because they look like plus the crucified, you know that term. So Jesus was crucified. So similarly, the flower looks like plus like arrangement. So we call this as cruciform corolla in mustard. So the mustard flowers is exhibiting actinomorphic symmetry. That is, they can be divided into two equal halves in any plane of division. And then the next slide was the datura flower. So datura, it is formally, I have told you, it grows wildly. You might see in empty vacant places, they grow as a weed. So they have this flower which looks funnel shaped. We call it as infundibuliform corolla. Because they look like funnel shaped, they are called as infundibuliform corolla. So even this corolla can be divided into two equal halves in any plane of division. Then we have this chili flower, which is chili is an example of Solanaceae family. Okay, so the chili flowers can also be divided into two equal halves in any plane of in any radial plane which is passing through the center. So thus this chili flowers are also called as actinomorphic flowers. Next slide. Here, a flower can be divided into two similar halves in only one particular vertical plane. So if a flower can be divided into two equal halves in only one particular vertical plane, we call that as the zygomorphic flowers or bilateral symmetry. See, this zygomorphic flowers can be seen in the uh, pea plant. Pea plant is botany, so where they have papillonaceous corolla. This type of corolla, we call it as papillonaceous corolla, where they have a single large petal, a pair of wings or aloe, we call it as, and there is a boat-shaped structure called as a pair of keel or carina. So papillonaceous corolla has a single large petal called as standard, a pair of wings or aloe, we call it as, a pair of boat-shaped petals, which we call it as keel or carina. That keel or carina will be enclosing this bundle of stamens. So later when we come to this stamens as well as in the Fabaceae family, I'll be again discussing about that. So this unique type of corolla, we call it as papillonaceous corolla. So papillonaceous corolla, they can be dissected into two equal halves in only one plane. Okay, even in Gulmohar flowers, Katikai Mara, I told you about. So even in Gulmohar flowers, you can divide this flowers into two equal halves in only one plane. Okay, then in cassia also you can divide the flower into two equal halves in only one plane. That is in only one particular vertical plane, you can divide these flowers into two equal halves. Such type of flowers, we call it as zygomorphic flowers, where they are having bilateral symmetry. In zygomorphic flowers, the flowers can be divided into two equal halves in only one particular vertical plane. So that condition, we call it as zygomorphic flowers. It is equivalent to bilateral symmetry. We can notice this zygomorphic condition in case of pea plant, where they have papillonaceous corolla. And you can also notice in case of Gulmohar flowers. So I told you as the Katikai Mara. So Gulmohar flowers and cassia, you can also notice this zygomorphic condition. Asymmetric condition, this type of symmetry, irregular symmetry, we also call it as. Here, a flower cannot be divided into two equal halves by any vertical plane which passes through the center. You cannot divide the flower into two equal halves by any vertical plane which passes through the center. Such sort of flowers, we call it as asymmetric flowers or irregular flowers. Example is Canna indica. Canna indica is grown as an ornamental plants in the parks. You might have seen them, different colors of these flowers being grown in the park. So this is an example for asymmetric flowers. In asymmetric flowers, the flower cannot be divided into two equal halves in any vertical plane which passes through the center. So we call it as asymmetric flowers or irregular flowers. Example is Canna indica. Then based on the number of floral appendages, flowers are of many types. Based on the number of floral appendages, the flowers are of many types. I told you already, most of the monocotyledonous plants, they are having trimerous flowers. That is, they'll be having three sepals, three petals, three plus three stamens. That is totally six stamens, but they'll be arranged in three plus three. Three carpels. Everything is in threes. So if a flower shows their floral appendages arranged in threes or in multiples of threes, like in some of them, the tepals might be outer whorl of three, inner whorl of three. That is three plus three. So this sort of conditions, if you notice, where all the whorls of flowers are in multiples of three or in three, we call those flowers as trimerous flowers. So floral appendages in trimerous flowers, they are in multiples of three. I told you that sepals might be in three, petals might be three plus three or three. Then stamens might be three or three plus three. So the ovary will be having three carpels. So such conditions where the floral appendages are in multiples of three or three, we call it as trimerous flowers. Similarly, I told you about tetramerous flowers. In these flowers, floral appendages are in multiples of four or in four. See the cruciform corolla in sasve mustard. So where they look like plus, even in this Coria alba, this example what we have, if you look into the flower, they look like plus, isn't it? Cruciform corolla they have. So crucified, you have heard that crucifix, the word. Okay, so cruciform type of corolla you can notice in case of tetramerous flowers. This is seen in this Brassica family, which includes mustard, radish, and others. So mustard is a very good example for cruciform corolla. Here they have given the flower Coria alba, which has this plus-like arrangement in corolla. So in this flower, you can notice that sepals will be four in number, petals will be four in number, the stamens will be four plus two or four plus condition. So this sort of flower where the floral appendages are in fours or in multiples of four, we call them as tetramerous flowers. Majority of dicotyledonous plants have floral appendages in five or in multiples of five. So we call them as pentamerous flowers. Majority of dicotyledonous plants, they have their flowers in floral appendages in five or in multiples of five. We call them as pentamerous flowers. See, in case of rose, you find the petals are in many whorls, isn't it? So one suttu, ಎರಡು ಸುತ್ತು, ಮೂರು ಸುತ್ತು ಅಂತ ಇರುತ್ತೆ the petals in case of rose. Many whorls are there. Each whorl will have five petals, five plus five plus five plus five. That is how in rose you find. Okay, so roses you can take it as a very good example for multiples of five. So the floral appendages, if they are in multiples of five, we call it as pentamerous fly. Multiples of five or five. See, they have five petals in Daswala, five petals, five sepals. This is one Sut Daswala. There are Yed Sut Daswala, Moor Suttu Daswala. That is one whorl of petals they might have, two whorls of petals they might have, or three whorls of petals they might have. But this particular one, what we are showing, it is one whorl of petals, five petals, one Sut Daswala. Idu. Okay, so you find they have only one whorl of petals. So the five sepals, five petals, then stamens would be infinite. They are not five, infinite. Indefinite numbers are there. Pentaphyte stigma. Illu five irate. Ovary, if you dissect, they'll have five carpels. So this condition where the floral appendages are in five or in multiples of five, we call that as pentamerous flowers. So pentamerous flowers is a characteristic feature of dicotyledonous plant. You can also notice this hexamerous flower. Very rarely, a few trees are having hexamerous flowers. One of the avenue trees is there where they have this purplish colored flower, and they almost the petal looks like crumpled paper. Like the petal looks like crumpled paper, and if you count there, six petals, six sepals, they are in multiples of six. Very few plants have this hexamerous condition. So one of the avenue trees, it has this hexamerous condition of flowers. We call that tree as Lagerstromia. Anyway, for you, it is just for general knowledge purpose. not for remembering for your examination. Okay, so hexamerous flowers are also noticed in a few plants, but majority of dicotyledonous plants have pentamerous flower. Majority of monocotyledonous plants have trimerous flowers. That is the reason we use this also as a distinguishing feature of monocotyledonous plants and dicotyledonous plants. Now the flowers, based on the position of ovary, the flowers are of three types. So based on the position of calyx, corolla, and androecium, with respect to ovary on the thalamus, the flowers are of three types. So the position of calyx, corolla, and androecium with respect to ovary on the thalamus, the flowers are classified as three types: hypogynous flower, perigynous flower, epigynous flower. So flowers based on the position of calyx, corolla, and androecium with respect to gynoecium or the ovary on thalamus, they are classified into three types: hypogynous flower, perigynous flower, epigynous flower. So these diagrams are important. From exam point of view, you have to draw this diagram. So you should practice this diagrams. I have told you wherever diagrams are important, I'll be letting you know. So these diagrams are important. See, in hypogynous flower, what you can notice is the receptacle or the thalamus is disc shaped or flat. The receptacle or thalamus is disc shaped or flat. So the ovary is above this receptacle or thalamus. And where do you see the sepals, petals, and stamen arising from? The calyx, corolla, and androecium is arising from below the ovary. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium is arising from below the gynoecium. So hypo means below, gynous ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು gynoecium. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium is arising from below the gynoecium. Such type of flower we call it as hypogynous flower. And what is the position of ovary here? Since all the three whorls are arising from below the ovary, ovary is superior in position. So based on the position of calyx, corolla, androecium with respect to gynoecium, we have three types of flower. The first type of flower is hypogynous flower and ovary is superior. In hypogynous flower, split the word hypogynous. Hypo means below, gynous means gynoecium. So what arises from below the gynoecium? The calyx, corolla, and stamens, they arise, the androecium, calyx, corolla, and androecium, they arise from below the gynoecium. So we call it as hypogynous flower. In perigynous flower, so half cup shaped, receptacle is half cup shaped. So half of the ovary is within this half cup shaped receptacle. Half of the ovary is above the receptacle. Okay, half ovary is within the cup shaped, half cup shaped receptacle. Remaining half is above it. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from in between the ovary, from the in between the ovary, the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise. So the ovary is semi-superior, you can call it as, or semi-inferior in position. Ovary is half inside, half outside. So you can either call it as semi-superior or semi-inferior. So the three whorls arise from here, isn't it? So the calyx, corolla, and androecium arises from in between the ovary, halfway from the ovary. So we call this as perigynous flowers. In members of Rosaceae family, you can notice that ovary is semi-superior, or you can also call this ovary as semi-inferior. So if someone tells you as you are a semi-intellect, so don't be very happy, because what is the other definition of semi-intellect? So semi idiot, it also it might be the other definition. Okay, so don't take it as a compliment. Similar to here, semi superior, it can also imply it as semi inferior. Ovary is semi superior or semi inferior. Why this condition arises is the receptacle is half cup shaped. Half of the ovary is within this receptacle, half is above this receptacle. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium rise from halfway from the gynoecium. So that is the reason we call it as perigynous flower, and the ovary is called as semi-superior or semi-inferior in position. In rose, you can see Rosaceae family. In almonds also, the flowers of these Rosaceae family, you can notice this perigynous flowers. Next is epigynous flowers. Epi ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು above, gynous ಅಂದ್ರೆ gynoecium. Epi means above, gynous implies gynoecium. So it is above the gynoecium. What is above the gynoecium? So the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from above the gynoecium. So the ovary is inferior in position. Okay, so the epigynous flowers, the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from above the ovary, above the gynoecium. So we call it as the epigynous flowers. The ovary is inferior. Why does this happen? See the receptacle here, it becomes cup-shaped structure, complete cup-shaped structure, and this cup-shaped structure is enclosing the ovary. Complete ovary is within this cup-shaped receptacle, and only the style and stigma is outside this. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from above this receptacle, cup-shaped receptacle. That is, it is above the gynoecium. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise above the gynoecium, and the gynoecium is within this cup-shaped structure. That is, cup-shaped receptacle structure will have this ovary. So the ovary is inferior. The ovary is inferior. So the flower is called as epigynous. So by splitting the terms, you get the definition, and you have to practice this simple diagrams. Okay. So now epigynous, in what type of flowers you notice? Sebaceae is an example for epigynous. Kumblukai, the pumpkin, you see the female flower of pumpkin, you notice that it is epigynous flower. Then pomegranate, dalambre, you see the flower of pomegranate. The pomegranate will be below the calyx. So in case of pomegranate, the calyx would also be red colored, just like the petals of the pomegranate. So the calyx, corolla, and androecium is above the ovary, even in a pomegranate or dalambre flower. So pomegranate flower, you can notice this. The apple is developed from inferior ovary. Apple is developed from inferior ovary. So now apple tinti what we eat in apple, we are eating this fleshy and juicy receptacle and core of the apple anti nodi. At the center there is a membranous, five membranous structure. If you have eaten the apple in a complete part, you can notice this five uh, carpels irate. Each carpel will have seeds. So that is nothing but the genuine fruit. It is deep seated. What we are eating in apple is the receptacle or thalamus. We are throwing away the fruit. Fruit is non-edible, membranous structure. So we, that is called as core of the apple, and we throw it away, isn't it? So the apple is also a product of inferior ovary. It's an inferior ovary. The flower is epigynous. So you can notice that. So the apple is considered to be a false fruit. Later, when we study about the fruits, we'll discuss about that. So have you understood about these three types of flower based on the position of gynoecium with respect to calyx, corolla, and androecium? Three types of flowers are there: hypogynous flower, perigynous flower, and epigynous flower. So hypogynous, split the word. Hypo means below, gynous means gynoecium. So here gynoecium, the ovary occupies the highest position, while other parts are situated below it. The ovary is superior, and the calyx, corolla, and androecium arises from below the gynoecium. Example for this hypogynous flower is mustard, saswe, China rose, that is the daswala, brinjal, badnekai. So they are all the hypogynous flowers. So the flowers of these are all hypogynous. Mustard, that is the saswe, China rose, the daswala or hibiscus, and brinjal, badnekai. So these flowers, they all exhibit this hypogynous flowers. So the ovary is occupying the highest position, while the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from below the gynoecium. So such a flower we call it as hypogynous. The ovary is superior. Example is mustard, China rose, and brinjal. So in perigynous flower, the gynoecium is situated in the center and they have a thalamus which is half cup shaped. So the ovary is present, half of the ovary is present within this cup and half of the ovary is above it. So the androecium, the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from half the cup shaped structure. Okay, so this sort of flower we call it as perigynous flower. The ovary is semi-inferior, or you can also call it as semi-superior. So the gynoecium is situated in the center, and other parts of the flower are located in this perigynous one of the flower. Rim of the thalamus they are located almost at the same level. So the ovary is half inferior. Okay, so in the second flower it is half cup shaped receptacle. So such type of flowers we call it as perigynous when the calyx, corolla, and androecium arises from half the way uh, from the gynoecium. Half the gynoecium we call it as perigynous flower. The ovary is semi-inferior, or it is also called as semi-superior. Example for this perigynous flowers you can notice in Rosaceae family, especially rose, peach, uh, then plum. You can notice this uh, structure of semi-inferior or semi-superior ovary. So rose they have dissected here. You can see that halfway the ovary is within the receptacle, half of it is above the receptacle. So you can notice this condition of semi-inferior ovary where the calyx, corolla, and androecium is arising from half of this cup-shaped structure, and half of the ovary is below and half is above the cup-shaped structure. So this condition we call it as perigynous flower. Ovary is semi-inferior or semi-superior. Then in epigynous flower, as the name indicates, epi means below, gynous means epi means above, gynous means gynoecium, above the gynoecium. So here the margin of thalamus grows upwards and encloses the ovary completely and gets fused with it. So other parts of the flower arise above the ovary. The ovary is inferior in position. The calyx, corolla, and androecium arise from above the ovary. So this type of flower we call it as the epigynous flower, and the ovary is inferior. Example for this is guava, cucumber, ray florets of sunflower, apple, pear. They are all example for this epigynous where the ovary is inferior. Since in I told you in apple, since they develop from this inferior ovary, in apple what we are eating is the fleshy receptacle or thalamus, and the ovary which forms the fruit we are not eating that. That is called as the core of the apple, which is non-edible and we throw it off. So that's the reason apple is a false fruit, we call it as. So remember about this epigynous flower. Epi means above, gynous means gynoecium. Above the gynoecium, the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise. Why is it above the gynoecium? Because the ovary is enclosed by this cup-shaped receptacle completely. And above this cup-shaped receptacle, the calyx, corolla, and androecium arise. That's the reason we call this as epigynous flower. The ovary is called as inferior ovary. Example for this epigynous flowers are guava, cucumber, ray florets of sunflower, apple, pear. They are all example for this epigynous flower. Um, so the where they are, ovary is inferior. Then even I told you about pomegranate or dalambre is also example for epigynous flowers. Then parts of a flower, if we look into, so we have this calyx, corolla, androecium, and gynoecium. So calyx and corolla are accessory whorls or non-essential whorls. Androecium and gynoecium are essential whorls. Okay, so now this you can remember about. So the calyx and corolla. So the accessory whorls, non-essential whorls, they don't get involved in reproduction, whereas androecium and gynoecium are called as essential whorls and or reproductive organs because they directly get involved in reproduction. So you can see the parts of a flower. So the calyx has sepal, the corolla is made up of petals. So the gynoecium or pistil, which is the female reproductive organ, you find they have a ovary, style, and stigma. Within the ovary, they have ovule. Androecium, which is the male reproductive organ, is a collection of stamens. You find the stamen which has a filament and an anther. The point at which the filament connects to the anther, we call it as connective. So calyx is a collection of sepals. Corolla is a collection of petals. So you can see the separated parts in Golmohar flower, calyx, corolla, androecium, gynoecium. So the first part that we are going to study about is calyx. Calyx is the collection of sepals. The outermost whorl of flower is calyx. It is generally sepals are green, leaf-like, and protect the flower in the bud condition. So the sepals are green, leaf-like, and protect the flower in the bud condition. You can notice in this bud condition of rose, the sepals are protective in function. They are green, leaf-like, and protect the flower in the bud condition sepals. The calyx, if the sepals are fused, we call it as gamosepalous. See here you have the flower which shows the sepals are fused. Can you notice that cup-shaped structure they have formed? Only at the tip the sepals are free, but at the base they are all completely fused. So this type of fused sepals we call it as gamosepalous. Sepals, if they are fused, we call it as gamosepalous. And if sepals are free, as in case of rose, you can notice here the sepals are free. They are not fused. We call this condition as polysepalous condition. So calyx is the outermost whorl of flower. It is made up of sepals. Generally, the sepals are green, leaf-like, and protect the flower in bud condition. So the calyx may be gamosepalous, where the sepals are fused, or the calyx might be polysepalous, where the sepals are all free. In case of rose, you can find that they are polysepalous. So the second oral, before that, I also would like to add a few more points for the uh, calyx or sepals. See, in some of the sepals, they are hair-like structures. So we call it as pappus. Especially in sunflower, you can notice this pappus. Calyx is hairy sepals, which we call it as pappus. So in Dandelion, you might have seen that Samsung part of the advertisement where the Dandelion it taps and all the sepals, they are the fruits, they are going to be dispersed from the flower, the globose flower like, or even in case of Avatar movie, you might have seen there are some of the parachute like the fruits that are coming down, and the chosen one also it lands on him and he is decided to be the chosen one in Avatar. What are those? See, they have this dispersal of the fruits by this hairy sepals. They give this parachute mechanism to them. So the hairy sepals are present in dandelion, sunflower. You just have to see the sepals. They don't look leaf-like, rather they are hairy. So these hairy sepals, we call it as pappus. Then there is persistent calyx. You have seen this in dapmanshinkai or dodmanshinkai or capsicum, what you call it as. Don't you see that they have a crown-like, so the stalk with crown-like thing, that crown-like structures are sepals. So generally sepals wither away after the formation of fruit. But in case of this capsicum fruticans, that is dodmanshinkai or dapmanshinkai, so capsicum fruticans, you find persistent calyx. So persistent sepals or persistent calyx is found in brinjal. The crown-like structures on brinjal is sepal. That sepal has not withered away. Generally, the sepals wither away after the formation of fruit, but here it is persistent. So persistent sepals, you can see it in case of brinjal as well as in case of capsicum fruticans, that is dapmanshinkai. what I was talking about. Okay. Next is corolla. What is corolla? Corolla is a collection of petals. The individual unit of corolla is petal. Okay, corolla is collection of petals. The individual unit of petal is the individual unit of corolla. Aliya alla maglaganda. See, that is how we define. If they ask you define petal, petal is the individual unit of corolla. Define sepal. Sepal is the individual unit of calyx. So you should be able to define that. Define corolla. Corolla is collection of petals. Define calyx. It is collection of sepals. So you should use these terms. Then the corolla is the inner to the calyx. It's the second whorl and it is inner to calyx. The petals are brightly colored. So it helps to attract the insects for pollination. So the petals are brightly colored and it helps to attract the insects for pollination. There are some flowers which bloom in the night, especially Brahma Kamla. You might have noticed that. See, the Brahma Kamla belongs to a uh, the cactus family. So in the night time, they are white colored. See, in the darkness, white flowers are contrasting and they are aromatic also. If you have smelt it, it's fragrant. Brahma Kamla is very fragrant. So they are pure white in color. Okay. So during night, from any distance, it is visible. So they attract the insects with their bright white color, which is contrasting to the darkness during the night time, and their aroma. It attracts the insect and brings about pollination in Brahma Kamla. They are not bright colored, they are white colored. Okay, so pure white I was talking about. So that is noticed in night in plants which flower during the night, especially Brahma Kamla. So the corolla is the collection of petals. Petal is individual unit of corolla. Remember that. It is innermost whorl after calyx. Petals are brightly colored, which helps to attract insects for pollination. If the petals are free, we call it as polypetalous, as in case of Daswala. In case of Datura, or in case of jasmine, Kanakambra, the petals are fused to form tube-like structure. Above that, you find petals are free, but the tube is also corolla tube. Okay, corolla may be gamopetalous, where the petals are fused or united. You notice that condition in Datura. You can notice they have a fused petal to form funnel-shaped corolla. You can notice that even in case of jasmine flowers, Kanakambra, I told you about, where the stalk is the corolla tube and the tip of the stalk, they have petals. It almost looks like free, but it is not free. The continuity of that is the tube-like structure. At the base, they are fused to form tube-like structure in case of jasmine, in case of Kanakambra. So they are fused petals, that is gamopetalous. Polypetalous, you can see it in Daswala, where you can separate the petals separately. They are free, they are not fused. So shape and color of corolla vary in plants. So in case of corolla may be tubular. In case of sunflower, disc florets of sunflower. Sunflower disc ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ disc florets ಇರತ್ತೆ. So you can notice the flower is going to be test tube like tubular. So tubular corolla you can notice. Uh, have you seen this Pichkari Mara? Maybe if I say Pichkari Mara, you might not remember it. Commonly we call it as Uchekai Mara. Okay, have you seen the flowers? They look like bells. So the flowers corolla is bell shaped. Even there it is a fused petals, that is gamopetalous condition. They look bell shaped. Adike, the scientific name of this Pichkari Mara, we call it as Spathodia campanulata. If they are having a bell-shaped flower, we call that corolla as campanulate. If it is test tube like tubular corolla, funnel-shaped corolla in Datura, you can notice the funnel-shaped corolla. So where we call it as infundibuliform. Wheel-shaped corolla, you can notice this rotate. Wheel-shaped is nothing but rotate corolla. You can notice this type of corolla in case of Vinca rosea, Kaniglevuva. you can notice this wheel-shaped corolla. So based on the shape and color of corolla, there are different types. Corolla may be test tube like, we call it as tubular corolla. If the corolla is bell shaped, as in Pichkari mara, that is Uchekai mara. So the flowers are bell shaped. So we call it as campanulate corolla. If the flowers are funnel shaped, just like a funnel, if they are, we call them as infundibuliform corolla. And if they are wheel shaped, just like wheel, we call them as rotate corolla. Okay, and in some of the flowers, they are papillonaceous corolla. They have a large petal, a pair of wings or aloe, we call it as, and a pair of keel or carina, boat shaped structure which is fused. So this type of corolla, we call it as papillonaceous corolla. It is a characteristic feature of the Fabaceae family. Papillonaceous corolla, you can notice in this Shankha pushpa, which is a creeper. You can also notice it in groundnut, green gram, all this cardo variety, the pulses, all of them have this papillonaceous corolla. Then there is bilabiate corolla. In Tulsi plants, the flower is bilabiate. There is tumbe gida. The tumbe gida is white colored flower. Generally, this tumbe ua is thought to be favorite of Lord Ganesha. Okay, so this tumbe ua, that is also, it is having two lips, upper lip and lower lip. So we call it as bilabiate corolla. See, two types of corolla are zygomorphic: papillonaceous corolla and bilabiate corolla. They are zygomorphic. You can divide them into two equal halves in only one plane. Bilabiate corolla example are this Tumbegida, Lucas aspera, we call it as. Anyway, don't remember the scientific name. Kannada name you can at least know. Bilabiate corolla. Two lips ಇದ್ದಂಗಿರತ್ತೆ corolla ನಲ್ಲಿ. So then papillonaceous corolla in they are also zygomorphic, and you notice in case of all the pulses, Shankha pushpa, then honge mara, pongamia, you've noticed this papillonaceous corolla. Papillonaceous corolla has a large petal shaped structure. We call it as standard, and there is a pair of uh, wing or aloe, and below that they have keel or carina. So this type of condition, papillonaceous corolla, you can notice it in the pulses. So they are the things that you have to remember in case of corolla. Corolla is the innermost whorl to calyx. It is composed of petals. Corolla is a collection of petals. The petals are brightly colored and it helps to attract the insects for pollination. So the corolla may be gamopetalous, that is, they might be fused, as in case of datura. You can see in the slide datura flower, or in jasmine also. You find that the tube-like structure is nothing but corolla tube, which is fused. Only the tip you have free petal-like structures. Then even in case of Kankambra, you notice the same, where the corolla tube, they are fused structures, gamopetalous. In Daswada or hibiscus or China rose, the petals are free. So you notice this free condition in case of hibiscus or Daswada. So the shape and color of corolla vary in plants, and the shape, based on the shape of the corolla, they are of different types. So cruciform corolla, the plus like arrangement in case of mustard, so we call it as cruciform corolla. They are arranged in a crucifix like pattern, plus pattern. So we call it as cruciform corolla in mustard, sasvegida, or Korea alba also. I gave you the example where they have this cruciform type of corolla. Then in case of disc florets of sunflower, they have tubular corolla. Then in case of Spathodia campanulata, that is the Pichkari mara. Okay, that is more dignified in saying than Uchekai mara. Okay, so the Pichkari mara, where the buds, if you fuse, if you press that, they are going to release water. You might have played with that. That is nothing but the Pichkari mara, where they have the bell-shaped corolla. So bell-shaped corolla, we call it as campanulate corolla. Then there is funnel-shaped corolla, as in case of this Datura. So we call this funnel-shaped corolla as infundibuliform corolla. So the funnel-shaped corolla, we call it as infundibuliform corolla. Wheel-shaped corolla you can notice in Vinca rosea or Canigle. So in lab, probably the pollen grain germination, you might use this Vinca rosea. Maybe in second year they might be doing that. So anyway, remember that Vinca rosea, which has wheel-shaped arrangement of the petals. So then papillonaceous corolla, which is very important in case of Fabaceae family. It is an identifying feature of Fabaceae family. So they have a large petal called as standard, a pair of wings, or we also call it as aloe, and a pair of keel or carina. They are both shape structure which are fused, and they have within them this a bundle of stamens and gynoecium. They enclose within them the androecium and gynoecium, this keel or carina. So they have a large petal called as standard, a pair of wings or aloe, a pair of petals which we call it as keel or carina, which is fused, and they are enclosing the androecium and gynoecium. This is called as papillonaceous corolla, which you can notice it in the all the cardo variety or pulses or legumes, what we call it as. Then in Shanka Pushpa, you notice that Hongemara, Pongamia. So there also you might notice this papillonaceous corolla. This is a characteristic feature of Fabaceae. You'll be studying this family Fabaceae, so it's better you remember about this papillonaceous corolla. Then there is one more variety of corolla called as bilabiate corolla. So bilabiate corolla, they have two lips, the upper lip and lower lip. You can see it in tulsi flower, flowers of tulsi, or we call it as basil. Then there is also one of the other flower that is tumbe gida. You might have seen that tumbe uva, so whitish flowers. So that is also again the what we call it as the bilabiate corolla. See, papillonaceous corolla and bilabiate corolla, they can be divided in only one vertical plane into two equal halves. So zygomorphic flowers examples are the bilabiate corolla, papillonaceous corolla are very good examples of the zygomorphic symmetry. So zygomorphic symmetry is noticed in papillonaceous corolla and bilabiate corolla. So remember about this for today's class. Uh, so this is what I wanted to discuss for today. So if you have any doubts or clarifications, you can inquire from me. Do you have any doubts or clarifications?